The year 1631 marked a crucial turning point in the devastating 30 Years' War. Protestant fortunes in the Holy Roman Empire had reached a desperate low. The Catholic imperial army, led by the formidable Count Tilly, seemed utterly invincible. Earlier that year, the horrific sack of Magdeburg had sent shockwaves of terror across Protestant Germany. Hope, however, arrived from the north in the form of King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. He was a brilliant military innovator, a king who led from the front. His army was a new kind of fighting machine, disciplined and professional. Tilly, seeking to force a decisive confrontation, invaded the neutral electorate of Saxony. This act of aggression forced the reluctant Elector of Saxony, John George I, into an alliance with the Swedes. The combined Swedish-Saxon army now marched to relieve Leipzig from Tilly's siege. On the morning of September 17th, 1631, the two great armies faced each other across a wide, flat plain near the village of Breitenfeld. A thick morning mist clung to the ground, obscuring the full strength of each force. Tilly commanded approximately 35,000 veteran troops of the Catholic League. His infantry was arrayed in the traditional, massive tercio formations. These were dense squares of pikemen and musketeers, powerful but ponderous. On his flanks, Tilly positioned his elite cavalry, including the fearsome Black Cuirassiers led by Pappenheim. Gustavus Adolphus commanded a larger force of around 41,000 men, though the Saxon contingent was inexperienced. The Swedish king deployed his army in a revolutionary new fashion. Instead of deep squares, he used shallow, linear formations. This allowed a much greater percentage of his musketeers to fire simultaneously. He also interspersed small detachments of musketeers within his cavalry squadrons. Most importantly, Gustavus possessed a superiority in artillery. His light, mobile 3-pounder cannons could be quickly repositioned during the battle. The Saxons, under John George, formed the left wing of the Protestant line. The Swedes held the center and the right wing. As the mist burned away, the battle began around noon with a massive artillery duel. The Swedish guns, firing faster and more accurately, began to take a heavy toll on the dense imperial tercios. Frustrated by the cannonade, the imperial cavalry commander Pappenheim grew impatient. Without waiting for orders, he led his Black Cuirassiers in a charge against the Swedish right flank. The Swedish cavalry, supported by their embedded musketeers, met the charge head-on. Pappenheim charged a total of 7 times. Each time, the disciplined firepower of the Swedes drove his elite cavalry back in disorder. This unauthorized action drew the imperial cavalry away from the main battle. Meanwhile, Tilly ordered his infantry to advance on the Saxon wing. The inexperienced Saxon soldiers watched in terror as the giant formations approached. The imperial advance was preceded by a devastating artillery bombardment. Under the combined pressure, the Saxon lines wavered. Then, they broke completely. John George himself was swept along in the panicked flight. The entire left wing of the Protestant army had simply vanished. Tilly's army had captured all of the Saxon artillery. Victory for the Catholic League seemed assured. The imperial tercios, having crushed the Saxons, now attempted to wheel and envelop the exposed Swedish flank. This was the moment of supreme crisis for Gustavus Adolphus. A lesser commander might have panicked or ordered a retreat. But the Swedish king was prepared for just such a possibility. He executed a brilliant and difficult maneuver under pressure. He ordered his second line on the left to swing back, forming a new defensive front. This move, known as refusing the flank, protected his army from being surrounded. The flexible Swedish brigades moved with a speed that stunned the imperial commanders. Now Gustavus Adolphus saw his opportunity. With the imperial infantry committed to their slow-wheeling maneuver, their own artillery was left exposed. The king decided to seize the initiative. He personally led a cavalry charge towards the center of the imperial line. The goal was to capture Tilly's guns on the Gallows Hill. The Swedish cavalry smashed through the thin screen of defenders. Within minutes, the entire imperial artillery battery was in Swedish hands. Without hesitation, the Swedish crews turned the captured guns on their former masters. The imperial tercios were now caught in a devastating crossfire. From their front, they faced the relentless volleys of the Swedish infantry. From their flank, their own cannons tore bloody lanes through their dense ranks. The once unbeatable imperial infantry began to falter. Their rigid formations became a death trap. Tilly, wounded, tried desperately to rally his men. But the pressure was too great. The Swedish infantry advanced, their Swedish salvo technique proving decisive. As dusk began to fall, the imperial army finally broke and fled. The retreat quickly turned into a complete rout. Thousands of imperial soldiers were killed or captured. The army of the Catholic League, the terror of Germany, had been annihilated. Count Tilly himself was wounded and barely escaped with his life. The Swedish losses were comparatively light. The Battle of Breitenfeld was a stunning and decisive victory for the Protestant cause. It shattered the myth of imperial invincibility. The tactical innovations of Gustavus Adolphus had been proven in the crucible of battle. Firepower, mobility, and discipline had triumphed over brute force and mass. The victory opened the heart of Germany to the Swedish army. Gustavus Adolphus was hailed as the savior of the Protestant faith. The course of the 30 Years' War had been irrevocably changed. The morning had dawned with the Protestant cause near extinction. The evening closed with the promise of a new beginning. The Swedish army's discipline was a stark contrast to their opponents. These tercios were powerful but lacked tactical flexibility. The Swedish system allowed for rapid adaptation to battlefield conditions. Pappenheim's repeated charges exhausted his elite cavalry for no gain. This squandered one of Tilly's most potent assets. The collapse of the Saxons could have been a fatal blow. Gustavus's calm and decisive leadership turned the crisis into a victory. The capture of the imperial artillery was the battle's turning point. It was a shocking reversal of fortune for the imperial army. The psychological impact of the defeat on the Catholic League was immense. For years, their armies had known only victory. Breitenfeld proved they were beatable. The battle would be studied by military leaders for centuries. It heralded the dawn of linear tactics and the age of firepower. The Swedish army's performance was a testament to its rigorous training. Every soldier knew their role in the complex system. The imperial army, by contrast, was a collection of mercenaries with varying loyalties. The wind and sun were at the backs of the imperial army, giving them an initial advantage. This blew dust and smoke into the faces of the Swedes and Saxons. But tactical superiority soon overcame this minor handicap. Tilly's decision to attack the Saxons first was logical but ultimately fatal. He underestimated the resilience and flexibility of the Swedish army. The battle lasted for over 6 hours. By the end, the field was a scene of utter carnage. The victory cemented Gustavus Adolphus's reputation as a military genius. He had not just won a battle, he had changed the art of war. The road to Vienna, the heart of the empire, now seemed open. Balance of power in Europe had been dramatically and violently shifted. The Swedish blue and yellow banners would become a symbol of Protestant resistance. The imperial tercios, once the kings of the battlefield, were now obsolete. The sound of the Swedish salvo would echo in the nightmares of their enemies. The battle was a brutal lesson in the effectiveness of combined arms. Tilly's army lost not just men, but its entire artillery train. The financial and material loss for the Catholic League was catastrophic. For the Swedes, the captured equipment was an enormous boon. The victory parade in Leipzig was a moment of pure triumph. The name Breitenfeld would forever be linked with Gustavus Adolphus. It was the king's greatest and most decisive triumph. Battle demonstrated the power of a national, rather than purely mercenary, army. Einbiller. The Swedish soldiers fought for their king and their faith. This gave them a morale advantage that proved crucial. The imperial army's cohesion shattered under extreme pressure. The Swedish army's cohesion held, even in the face of disaster. The flight of the Saxons was a blessing in disguise. It allowed the Swedes to fight the battle on their own terms. The imperial army was drawn into a trap of its own making. The speed of the Swedish cavalry was breathtaking. Their charges were decisive and perfectly timed. The battle was a symphony of coordinated violence. Every part of the Swedish army worked in concert. The imperial army was a blunt instrument. The Swedish army was a surgeon's scalpel. The victory at Breitenfeld secured the Protestant north of Germany. It allowed Sweden to establish a firm foothold in the empire. The war would continue for many more bloody years. But the tide had turned, decisively and forever. On a field near Leipzig,